Hello, I am Major Retired André Tivierge, and I am the co-chair of the Ottawa Veterans Task Force. I'm happy to bring this initiative to you in partnership with the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Ottawa. Today, we will be discussing a rapidly growing area of understanding in mental health related to medical conditions, those which we referred to wounds of soul, and will familiarize you with specific experiences that include moral injury, military sexual trauma or MST, and related terms such as sanctuary trauma and institutional betrayal. It is important that you, as practitioners and future family doctors, be aware of these concepts and terminologies, as they are the cause of real pain and suffering for many veterans and significantly impact their quality of life and that of their families. In this session, you will be introduced to terms commonly used in the veteran community, such as moral injury and military sexual trauma, to understand the various forms of suffering and possible dysfunctions from military-related occupational experience and exposures. From the lens, you will develop an understanding about the important role you can play, the healing power you have as a family doctor with your patient in supporting veteran healing from moral injury and military sexual trauma, and increase your awareness of veteran-specific resources to enhance your knowledge and support of veteran patients who are dealing with anger, shame, and disassociation. To achieve those important objectives, we have put together a panel of experts, some of which have served and still serving in the military and in operational theaters. Thank you very much and enjoy today's episode.
So thank you everybody for joining us for this module on moral injury and military sexual trauma. I am Dr. Stephanie Smith, and I'm also a captain in the Canadian Armed Forces. I've been in the military for 21 years and originally was a critical care nursing officer and then trained as a family medicine physician. I currently work in Gagetown, New Brunswick, and I've been actively involved and very interested in this topic, doing a master's research and looking at the psychological implications associated with deployments. I'm very excited to be joining you today for this module where we can further explore. Additionally, I'm very interested in collaborating with our civilian counterparts. I've been very involved with the Canadian Medical Association, the Resident Doctors of Canada, and the Canadian Federation of Medical Students within leadership roles over the last few years. And I would like to now tell you a bit more about what we will be talking about today. As a family doctor, we may already know lots about things that we'll talk about today, but maybe we won't. And our goal today is to be more comfortable knowing about how and when to diagnose mental health-related medical conditions that meet DSM-5 criteria, such as PTSD, GAD, and depression. However, what can you know or what should you know about when a veteran presents to you with ongoing suffering and dysfunction that don't meet medically diagnosable criteria? One possible explanation for their mental and physical pain presentations can be related to a rapidly growing new area of understanding that some refer to as wounds of the soul. Terms that are being used to describe the reactions veterans may have to military-specific experiences include moral injury, military sexual trauma, otherwise referred to as MST, and related terms such as sanctuary trauma and institutional betrayal. Operational stress injury, or OSI, is another commonly used and interrelated term that has already been discussed in a previous podcast, so we will not be further discussing this here. It is important for family doctors to be aware of these concepts and terminologies, as they are the cause of real pain and suffering for many veterans and are impacting the quality of their lives and that of their families. Although not medically diagnosable as conditions, there is still much we can do as family physicians so that we can help and support the veteran patients and be with them on their healing journey. Before we start, I also want to acknowledge that we may be giving examples or discussing topics that may be disturbing for some. So let's start with the discussion first by asking Ms. Ruth Stanley Atkins and Dr. Daniel Roberts to introduce themselves. I hand it over to you, Ruth.
Why, thank you, and I'm so pleased to be here. I'm a social worker. I am retired from CF Health Services Center, Ottawa, after many, many years serving those who served. I tend to work on the Operational Trauma and Stress Support Center as a trauma psychotherapist social worker, and I also had the great honor of running mental health services prior to my retirement. But now I work for the Sexual Misconduct Response Center. I came to the center in 2016, and my role as a special advisor is to ensure that trauma is well understood and that our services have a trauma-informed practice as we move forward. Thank you so much. Very glad to be here. Over to you, Dr. Roberts.
Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Roberts. I'm the president and CEO of a nonprofit organization based in North Carolina, USA, called Moral Injury Support Network for Service Women Incorporated. And we conduct research and education training on moral injury related to women, veterans, and families. We also provide direct support to women veterans through our Harriet Tubman Chaplain Network. We'll talk about that probably more later. But I also served for over 20 years in the U.S. Army Chaplain Corps in the Army. So thank you, and I look forward to this discussion today.
Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for your commitment to this very important topic we will discuss today. Let's start with Ruth. Ruth, could you share with us your definition of moral injury as it could relate to veterans in general?
Yes, of course. Actually, Jessica Wolfendale describes it as an injury from experiencing or witnessing or engaging in acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations, or grievous moral transgressions that can overwhelm one's sense of goodness and humanity. It's an injury created by the experience of those things which tend to fall outside of our everyday expectations for civil behavior and conduct. We are socialized to sort of believe in a just world hypothesis, in the sense that if we are good things will happen to us. If we get our education, we'll get good jobs. But we know the reality of life is that very bad things happen to very good people. And those people can experience an injury to the meaning they make of their world, their place in the world, their spirituality, their own sense of value, confidence, and safety in the world, and their beliefs that others can actually be safe. And again, this injury is known as a moral injury.
Thank you, Ruth. Daniel, is there anything else that you would like to add to this definition related to moral injury? And could you explain and give us an introduction to what sanctuary trauma is?
Yeah, thank you. Ruth, you did a great job explaining moral injury. I think it covers it really well. I think it is important to note that, like you mentioned, we all know that bad things happen in the world and bad things happen to good people. But it's when it becomes personal, when it happens to us, that all of a sudden those things become so real that there's a difference between knowing, in a sense, of hearing about it, seeing on TV, and experiencing it. And that's where the trauma really, gets us at a core level. Sanctuary trauma relates to when you are harmed in some way by someone that you deeply trust, or expect to take care of you, that you're to be safe with. For instance, a chaplain, a medical doctor, people that have education, they've gone through a process to be a person of trust, and we hold them to a high standard, a high level of that their purpose and job in life is to take care of others, like chaplains. And then when they violate that and violate us in some way, we call that sanctuary trauma.
Thank you, Daniel. And I think you really highlight that powerful, emotionally overwhelming impact that we can have. And we really need to recognize how we are so integrated and important to understand that powerful role. I wanted to take it back to Ruth and ask you if you could share with us a definition of military sexual trauma as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to speak of it from a Canadian Armed Forces perspective, but you can insert any fighting force in this definition. But in general terms, military sexual trauma refers to the harm that occurs when a person in uniform experiences unwanted sexualized behavior, sexual harassment, or sexual assault while serving in His Majesty's Canadian Armed Forces, whether in garrison, so on the base or at home, on deployment, in training, or while on peacekeeping missions. Within the Canadian Armed Forces, it's called sexual misconduct, and the Canadian Armed Forces have a rather complete and complex definition of it, which really ranges from inappropriate sexualized jokes to sexual assault, all of which can be offenses against the National Defence Act, but also those of a criminal nature are, of course, against the Criminal Code of Canada. I just also want to say around military sexual trauma that men and women experience military sexual trauma. It's a bit of an important message for us because it doesn't necessarily come to mind when we're talking about MST. And I just want to make sure that today we all remember that it can be both men and women. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. You're highlighting some excellent points and very important for us to consider all of those. Danielle, we're going to go back to you. And I was wondering if you could further expand on another term that would be important for family medicine physicians to consider, and that's related to institutional betrayal.
Yeah, thank you. So institutional betrayal often occurs when you're talking about military sexual trauma or other kind of traumas. And institutional betrayal is when a person expects the institution, their organization, the group that they rely on and trust in, like in the military, their military unit, their military commander, or it could be in a medical sense, their healthcare organization. They rely on them and trust in them to care for them properly, to handle their trauma properly, to see they get justice. If that doesn't happen, right, if the system fails them in some way, then we call that institutional trauma. So you have an individual trauma maybe that occurs like a sexual assault, for instance, and then, going back to the military context, and then if the military doesn't properly follow procedures or the commander doesn't take action, is swept under the rug, now the institution has also traumatized the person.
Thank you very much for explaining that further. I think even as a family physician in the military, and as mentioned, a previous nurse, many of these terms I'm just becoming familiar with and still trying to customize myself and educate myself better. So I think it's fantastic that you both have been able to really go over some complex different definitions that potentially we could have multiple podcasts on. Obviously, there's some interrelated topics that you've discussed, and you've been able to cover many things in a very quick period of time. Next, I would like to introduce Major Retired Dr. Karen Breek. She's joining us today to also speak on this very important topic. She is a retired, as mentioned, family physician from the Canadian Armed Forces. She has been an advocate for veterans' health for many years, spending countless hours advocating, working with the government, and advocating as well with universities across the country. I would like you to talk a little bit more about your experience as a retired military physician yourself, and if you could share a few words on what you see the role of the civilian family doctor as it relates to the veteran-specific issues we've been discussing. I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, and thank you so much to Ruth and Daniel for your valuable insights in preparing us all to learn about this new emerging field of study and understanding. Don't be afraid if you haven't heard of these terms before. I think for a lot of us, it's only been in the last few years. We're beginning to learn and understand, and there's no question, 5 years from now, we're going to understand way more about these topics. But until that time, for today, if I'm a busy family physician, what do I really need to know about these? How can I actually help a patient that presents with one of these? Well, if I can offer a few pearls, I think one of the most important things is that we actually understand how important it is to have military or veteran cultural awareness. Veterans are much more likely to trust and talk to you about their experiences if you are familiar with their terminology, if they came to you using these terms that you were familiar with them. Having said that, many veterans will come to you not knowing these words, not knowing how to express what it is that is wrong with them, They just know something is not right. And they don't know how to present their history. It could be physical issues, it could be psychological issues. There's an entire spectrum of how these may be presenting as a suffering or a pain or a dysfunction in their lives. They could be gastrointestinal, it could be neurological, it could be chronic pain, sexual dysfunctions, along with mental health. Really, the presentations can be quite diverse. So in my experience, once as a family doctor, you are comfortable that you have ruled out any diagnosable conditions. You're sure that they've been screened for any DSM-5 conditions. And if they do have any medical issues or psychological issues, that they are getting the right care that they should be getting, but that they still have these other symptoms. Then for me, one of the keys might be to ask about their emotional state. Ask them if there is a specific emotion that they're feeling much more commonly, because often with these conditions, there is a strong sense of anger, guilt, shame, and in some cases, no emotion at all. So the disassociation. So by acknowledging the presence of these strong emotions and connecting them to these symptoms, exploring where they think maybe this emotion is coming from may be a really useful approach to help identify veteran unmet needs or challenges. Also, many veterans can have complex multifactorial trauma exposures from both pre and post their military times. It is not uncommon that a veteran with some of these kind of symptoms may have more than one trauma source, and some of their traumas could be overlapping in how they're presenting for them. And it is not uncommon that the most obvious trauma, hey, I've had all of these things happen, and maybe one of them sounds really profound, like I've been in combat or I've been assaulted. Don't be surprised. It may not be the trauma that is actually causing them the most pain right now. So always be open to that possibility that it could be multiple traumas of multiple types. Indeed, with many of the operational stress injuries, military sexual traumas, institutional betrayal is often the term, once you get down to it, that can be the source of the greatest pain. Often what has occurred is a break in trust. They have broken their trust in their self, their trust in others, their trust in their workmates, their peers, and unfortunately, many of them have also had a broken trust with healthcare providers. So to be aware of that. This may all sound confusing and complicated as a topic, but let me assure you, really it isn't. Never underestimate the power, the healing power of their family doctor actually making a veteran feel heard, feel seen, and be believed that something isn't right with them and they don't know what it is. I think the more that we all learn and research these various topics, what we keep seeing more and more of is that for the most part, these are normal physiological reactions to abnormal external exposures. And when we think of it that way, I think it's important as a family doc that we recognize that people can present to us in pain and in suffering, and it doesn't have to have a medical diagnosis or be pathologized or be medicalized. It doesn't all need medication. Sometimes a veteran just needs to be reassured that they're not going crazy, that they're not making it up, that they're not mentally weak, that they are actually being a normal human being given what they have experienced. And by giving them hope that they're not sick and that they can get better, and given some more information, peer support, community support, and for some spiritual supports, all of a sudden we can be part of their healing journey. So thank you for this opportunity to give a little bit of a family doctor lens.
Thank you very much, Dr. Breek, for your helping us putting this module into perspective and on the most important role that family doctors can play to help normalize and provide supports to our veterans. Ruth and Daniel, I'm wondering if either of you would have a resource recommendation for family physicians to offer to impacted veteran patients. Ruth, I'll go to you first.
Thank you. Yes, I would invite any family physician seeking information to consider contacting the Sexual Misconduct Response Center. Just call us, see what it's like. We'll give you an idea of what we have to offer, and I'll talk a little bit about that now. Our phone number is 1-844-750-1648. And I give you that number because our first point of access is our 24/7 line. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. And we offer services in both French and English. And our group that we service, of course, are veterans, CAF members, Canadian Armed Forces members, D&D employees who experience sexual misconduct or military sexual trauma, and of course to those who support them, like family physicians, their friends, their families, and leaders. Our trained counselors respond to calls on the line, which offer supportive counseling. They can explore service options, both internal and external to the Canadian Armed Forces. They can provide options to consider which meet their needs in a variety of topics and make connections to those services if they're seeking additional care. We have access to military liaison officers to help our clients understand internal and external legal processes and who can liaise with, for example, chains of command. As I mentioned, it is a bilingual service in both English and French, and people can access our line without identifying themselves. They can choose an alias. They don't have to expose any of their information. They tell us what they want to tell us. They're not required to tell us their experience of sexual misconduct in order to receive services. And you may wonder, as family physicians, how we can help you. We can provide support to your patients as they wait for referrals to mental health or other services. We can provide information on military culture, language, and processes. We can identify additional resources in your community and support you when you start to feel the effects of hearing your patients suffering. Please consider contacting us. We absolutely support anyone who calls us. We turn no one away. We have other types of services available. We have something called response and support coordination, which is a case management function. And they provide consistent and ongoing support during business hours to the people who we serve. We are also delivering the restorative engagement program, which is a component of the Canadian Armed Forces Department of National Defence sexual misconduct class action suit. And we also have a peer support platform in conjunction with Veterans Affairs Canada called Together All. And if you check our slides, you will see access information to all of those services. And finally, I just want to mention, we are the Center of Excellence on Sexual Misconduct for the Canadian Armed Forces. We have a monitoring and oversight responsibility. We track progress, data results, and systemic issues. So I encourage any family physician to contact us, see what we have to offer, and don't hesitate. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Ruth. I think that's one of the biggest challenges as family physicians is having our patients wait for a significant period of time sometimes to access some of the mental health resources. It's very reassuring to know there are some caveats or resources we can look into to help support our patients while they're waiting. I'm going to hand it over to you, Daniel, to add in any resources you may want to recommend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ruth, your organization is doing tons of great work, so I'm very excited about that. For us, three things I would offer. One, we monthly we have the Canadian Moral Injury Community of Interest meeting. I'm the one American in the group, but we meet together every month on Zoom, and we talk issues about moral injury as it relates to Canadian, not just Canadian Armed Forces, but within a Canadian context. And those discussions are very in depth. They're not training sessions, right? We don't have somebody. Sometimes we have folks presenting things, but really they're just in-depth discussions. We have chaplains in the group, we have medical doctors in the group, we have psychologists, people involved in research. We have military veterans and just a broad range of people. Some that are still serving in the military. And it's not just about military moral injury, but we cover moral injury in a whole lot of different ways. So they're very informal discussions, great talks over a cup of coffee in the evening once a month, and really tremendous. So if you're interested in participating in the Moral Injury Community of Interest meeting, that information is on the slide, how to get in touch. It's free, no costs, but your time. And it's an investment in your time. I think you'll enjoy it. The second thing is we have what's called the Harriet Tubman Chaplain Network. And what that is, it's a network of women chaplains who are highly educated. They're trained in moral injury and how to help folks with moral injury. They have helped women veterans, through moral injury issues. And it's what makes it unique is it's only women chaplains caring only for people who self-identify as women veterans, either are serving or have served in the U.S. or Canadian armed forces. And the reason we set that up is that 95% of military chaplains, at least in the U.S. military, are male. And I know that in the Canadian chaplaincy, it's a large number, percentage are male. And sometimes women need care and support, pastoral care from someone who is more in tune and has more experience and more deep knowledge about what it means to be a woman serving in the military. So to help provide that care for them, we put together that network. To qualify to get care from the network, you just have to self-identify as a woman, self-identify as a veteran, or a currently serving servicewoman, and we provide that pastoral care free. There's a phone number, email address, and you can also connect to us through our website, which you'll see on the slide. I think it's important to note that's not an emergency service. If you have a veteran that is in crisis, right, then they should use emergency services, hotlines, the emergency room, that kind of thing. But what we provide is more ongoing, longer term, or even short term care for someone who needs to speak with a chaplain and may have some issues they're struggling with, but is not in an emergency crisis situation. We just, our chaplains are on call, but they do have some time to be able to get back with a person. It's more like care after trauma, not immediate crisis care. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the third thing is that we do an annual conference, moral injury conference, the Comprehensive Moral Injury Conference. That conference is for chaplains, social workers, psychologists, medical doctors, people in the care field that want to learn more about moral injury, more about the latest research that's out there, intervention methods that people are using, that sort of thing. So that's not for the veterans, it's for the care providers. And we get presentations from a variety of folks, both in US, Canada, and the UK, doing presentations on the work they're doing in moral injury and how it supports, or how they're helping veterans, people in the healthcare fields, people in law enforcement. It's a very broad sort of perspective conference. Those are the main services that I want you to be aware of today.
Thank you so much for that, Daniel. It sounds like you're doing fantastic work. And I think the term moral injury is really growing in the last few years, more literature coming out, even in the healthcare realm, where we're seeing a lot of implications from the COVID pandemic. And I think this will be very interesting for family physicians to learn more about. So thank you very much for sharing those easily accessible resources. I'm looking forward to hopefully attending some of them in the future. I just wanted to hand it back to any of the speakers if they had any final thoughts before we end this podcast.
Yeah, so my one thought is I think it's important that, and Karen alluded to it, but as a family physician, and nurses are very much in this category too, you're often the very first person, you may be the very first person that notices that there are some issues with the veteran beyond what you're classically trained to do. And so you are very critical to connecting veterans to greater resources, and you should never underestimate the role you can play in ensuring that a veteran gets holistic care in all the realms that they're hurting mentally, physically, spiritually.
I wanted to also highlight that a lot of times people assume veterans are not healthcare providers themselves, and especially within the Canadian Armed Forces, we actually we are the accredited 14th healthcare system within the military. So we actually have a large number of veterans that are themselves healthcare providers. So to just be aware that with all of the research of uniquely issues related to healthcare providers, that can also be for healthcare veterans as well.
Thank you very much for both adding that additional very important material. I also think it really resonates with me, the importance of acknowledgement of events that have happened and really using our ability to use empathy and compassion when we're having these conversations. I appreciate all of your time. Thank you very much. In conclusion, I wanted to thank the University of Ottawa and the City of Ottawa Veterans Task Force for their support for creating these podcasts to ensure that family physicians can learn more about the veteran population and many of the experiences they may have had. Additionally, I think there's wonderful opportunity for collaboration and learning from what's happened in the military and helping our civilian counterparts. Fortunately, I was able to develop a resiliency course that looks at many of the different topics that were discussed today and how stress management and resiliency skills can be developed to help people navigate, help yourself, help your peers, and also help your patients. There can be a lot of learning that can come from the work that we've done within the military, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to continue collaborating and learning how we can do knowledge translation that helps not only the military community, but also the civilian community. Thank you very much.